The Bucks are pinning their hopes to two people to try to lure Giannis back to Milwaukee. Is it the right duo? And what about the future of the NBA? Will things run through Indiana and Oklahoma City go forward? Camille and I dig into that coming up next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I am Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. Camille, you can find as an NBA analyst here on the Locked On Network and the Technical Foul podcast. You can find me in season on the Bucks Radio Network. We thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. And to all the everydayers out there with us in the live chat today and leaving their thoughts all throughout the off season. Camille, there's a little bit of news to catch up on from when we last spoke here. And I believe one of these pieces came out midpoint of last week. And the other one is a recent development from Mark Stein. So there are two players, or two people, I should say, that it seems like the Bucks are kind of leaning into. Is like, well, we got this card up our sleeve here in terms of painting the picture for, look, this is why you want to stay here. Let's continue to add these things for Giannis. We've talked about the conference and the importance of staying in the East, or at least how that should be perceived for Giannis. But that other piece that broke last week was Thanasis announcing on his own podcast he has been cleared to resume basketball activity and is plotting a comeback, which gets everybody thinking. And Frank himself has even made this mention several times. Okay, one of the open roster spots you give to Thanasis, so that's another selling point for Giannis here. But the other one comes to us from Mark Stein, what I believe on Memorial Day. That and I'm going to say this in duck because I know how the comment section feels. The Bucks are hopeful that Giannis's relationship with Doc Rivers is one of the bigger things to sell him on. Of, look, maybe it's a gap year. Maybe it's, as we both said, is it really a gap year? Ideally, you finish right where you were this past year. But maybe that's what you're facing here. You got Doc Rivers, who you really do have a strong relationship with. We can lean into some of the things we did late last season. And then we continue to get into a better spot here cap-wise where we can really start to add some things these next 2 years.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to pitch it based on, like, Bucks fans wouldn't go for it, but Giannis might because of their relationship. And I mean, for all of the everydayers who are listening, I see the comments of, we're having conversations about, oh, these young guys need to show improvement next year. And they're like, no, the Bucks need to fire Doc Rivers. And I'm reading those comments and I'm like, I don't see that really happening. And then this Mark Spears, report, or Mike Stein report comes out saying, like, they're planning to leverage Doc Rivers to try to keep Giannis in Milwaukee. And that said a lot without even saying a whole lot. It's just one sentence, but it just goes to show the respect levels that Giannis reportedly does have for Doc Rivers. And I've been on the record saying, like, when Mike Budenholzer was fired, if you would have told me that Doc Rivers was going to be the head coach to carry the Bucks forward, I would have been very surprised and saying, why? Like, we have Doc at home with Bud. But I did give Doc his credit for the presence that he has in the locker room, being able to manage relationships, communicate expectations pretty well. Even though there are some things with the coaching where it's like, we gotta try to clean this up. I mean, you can point to that Pacer series and how long it took for him to pull that lever of changing the starting lineup. So I understand how fans are feeling about Doc Rivers, but if Doc Rivers is a coach that Giannis respects and enjoys to play for and can see a future with, absolutely go ahead and leverage that relationship then, because the most important thing for me is just finding a way to keep Giannis in Milwaukee, sell him on the future that the Bucks are trying to sell here of what this team can be. And if Doc Rivers is going to be a part of that, Thanasis, like, pull those cards.
Yeah, and look, I get the skepticism, and you mentioned it as well. The parallels between Doc and Mike Budenholzer, not even skepticism. I get the fact that most Bucks fans do not like their current head coach. little bit more tricky situation for me to leave any comment on that. So I'll allow you to do that, Camille. But what I would just say is, look, what would you rather have? Doc Rivers and Giannis or no Giannis? Which of the two would you like? And even if you're somebody that's trade Giannis and get assets, we have tried to lay out the case of, I'm not saying it's certainly not impossible, but it's very tricky because of how many needles you're going to need to thread here. You can point to San Antonio and say, well, you can get the number 2 pick in the draft this year, although maybe it's smoke screens, maybe it's not. San Antonio giving off the vibes of, nope, we want to stay at 2 and we want to continue to build this core here. The report that came out yesterday as well, that Chris Paul is very likely not going to be back in San Antonio because they're continuing, they bring in De'Aaron Fox last year. They're projected to take a 2 guard. So they're suddenly not going to have a whole lot of room back there in the backcourt. But the challenge is, look, if you center on that package where you take back salary to match, you get the number 2 pick in the draft this year, any draft pick for that matter. If we go by how most Bucks fans view John Horst, you're in trouble because those draft picks are not going to hit based on what we've been told, right? But also, it would have to, and we went through this last week too. It's really only 2 teams in our mind that make sense in terms of the packages that they can offer, and that's the Spurs and Rockets. But the tricky part is for the Bucks, the Spurs one almost seems to make the most sense because you can get immediate impacts now with the players you would get back to absorb salary with the number 2 pick theoretically and future draft picks as well. The problem the Bucks have is they own nothing. 2030, and that's a pick swap. So you can't just trade them off and say, okay, we'll get back these picks because number one, whatever team Giannis goes to, that's going to be a good team. So if you take their draft picks, probably not a good pick you're getting unless you kick that can down the road like the Pelicans and Blazers did to you. And you can't do that because you don't have any assets between now and then. So you're going to be a bad team with nothing to show for it in that sense. So I've still, and I know you do as well, have long maintained, I think the best thing here is to retain Giannis. And hopefully that's what he sees and he wants to be a part of. But retain Giannis and start to dig yourself out of this hole and hit it on the margins, on the very limited draft picks you have. Maybe you do things like buying second-round picks. At this point, I would advise against it because of how much you're leveraged, but you could even look into, we need some short-term help. Maybe we trade that 2031 unprotected and break it into 2 or 3 picks, similar to what Phoenix did. But I just think making yourself better is easier said than done in a trade with Giannis because of the spot the Bucks are in with the rest of their assets.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And thinking about Stein's report in regards to Giannis, which again leads to us believe like they have not yet met the Milwaukee Bucks and Giannis. Looking at Giannis's social media, it seems like he's overseas with his brothers, watching them play. So the timing of this is interesting to me for that reason of like, okay, they haven't met yet, but now reports are coming out about how the Bucks plan to pitch Giannis when he does come back. And that gap year idea is becoming, well, from what Stein's reporting, is the basis of the pitch to Giannis of like, hey, we kind of saw what was working. We're going to continue to build around that. It might not happen in its full this year, but next year is going to be a big one. And then with the free agents that the Bucks have as well, like we had an episode last week talking about which of the young guys' development we think is going to be most important. And we both landed on Andre Jackson Jr. But as I think about it too, and I saw some comments pointing out Tyler Smith coming into his second year here. And I think for me, it was a question of like, I'm not sure how much I want to say we need to rely on him in his sophomore season, given how infrequently he played during his rookie year. But if Brook Lopez is out the door, the skill set that Tyler Smith has is one that fits very well next to Giannis. So it's just, if it's going to be Doc, and I know people believe that Doc does not play young players, but it's going to have to be, if that's the case, a Doc Rivers coach team with Giannis, with some young guys having a bit more influence and a bit more playing time than they even did last year, which they got some playing time. Like Gary Trent Jr. is a young guy. We saw AJ Green. We saw Kevin Porter Jr. So that's just the way I think that is going to have to go forward for the Bucks, whether that is out of necessity or just understanding like this is the best way forward.
Yeah. Some additional thoughts on that. And since you brought up Tyler Smith, I do want to talk about that as well. As we mentioned too, very interesting conversation took place on a different podcast about the future, who has the brightest future in both the Eastern Conference and Western Conference. And I just feel like we keep falling in the same trap, Camille. So we'll talk through that as well coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. Well, these days are getting longer. The weather's warming up and people are spending more time outside, which means it's the perfect time to refresh your outdoor space. Whether you're working with a big backyard or a small balcony, Wayfair has everything you need to make it feel more like you. Wayfair's massive selection of outdoor essentials makes it easy to transform any space into your ideal summer setup. From comfy conversation sets to sleek dining tables and outdoor decor, they've got it all, and at prices that fit your budget. You'll love the mix of styles they offer, as Wayfair makes it super easy to find pieces that match your vibe without spending a fortune. The delivery is free and hassle-free, even for the big stuff. Whether you're entertaining guests or just relaxing solo, you can shop Wayfair to help you unwind. Shop a huge selection of outdoor furniture online this summer. Get outside with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That is wayfair.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. So the Tyler Smith mention is interesting because that is one that we didn't really mention, but I know we talked about it last year too. And that, look, there's something clearly here with the guy, that there is some NBA skill set. It was still just, he's very young. He's very raw. You weren't going to throw him into those types of situations last year. But there's no denying he has an NBA ready shot. And I think Doc himself mentioned this a couple of times last year. I remember talking about it with someone else too. He just has a knack for being around the ball. And you've seen that with rebounding, loose balls, all of it. So there's something there. And I don't know that I would definitively say Brook Lopez is gone, but it does feel more and more like that. And not just the Bucks are making this decision of we got to get younger and we got to play a different way up front. I think, and maybe we should just peel the Band-Aid off now, Camille, Brook Lopez is going to have a list of suitors this offseason, even though he's 37 years old and we can say, well, he's old and slow. But as we have seen all throughout his career, if you have the right pieces around him and use him in a certain way, there is value there. And this is a league that, for all the talk of small ball, when was the last time you heard that? Like, we've exited that. It's a big league now where bigs are important. And Brook Lopez is going to find a lot of suitors, pretty similar to what happened with the Houston Rockets a couple of years ago. Now, is that going to be $25 million annually? No, I don't think so. But, I mean, just look at some of the teams in the postseason where you would question, do they have a big for this spot? Those are the teams that are going to be interested in Brook Lopez for somewhere around the mid-level exception or somewhere in between the taxpayer and the full mid-level. So I do think this isn't as easy as if the Bucks want Brook Lopez back, he's back. That would mean you would think there's going to be more of an opportunity for Tyler Smith next season.
Absolutely. And not even just like, hey, the Bucks could throw a minimum at Brook and he'll come back. Like you mentioned, I think he's going to have a bit of a market. ESPN recently put together their free agent rankings for this summer. And I think Brook Lopez was 12th or 13th or something on that list. He was in the category of aging starters. So Bucks fans could, he's definitely an aging starter, but there just aren't many big centers that can shoot 36, 37% from three consistently, give you some rim protection along the way. And it's like, yes, Brook Lopez has definitely lost a step, but there are going to be other teams looking probably with a championship window of like, we just need one big here that can kind of stretch the floor, play a little defense, and help us out in spots, because ESPN mentioned the Pelicans as a possible destination to pair him next to Zion Williamson to give Zion some space around him.
Assuming
in addition to that, in
or
addition
for the
to
games he's on the floor.
Yeah, that's the problem with Zion. But and also just kind of mentor the young centers that they already have on their roster. But the team that they brought on ESPN that was interesting to me was the Golden State Warriors. The Golden State Warriors would have to find ways to cut some salary on their end to be able to use the taxpayer or the mid-level taxpayer, or you know what I'm talking about.
Or the taxpayer mid-level, yeah.
There you go. Them the words in the right order. To use that or a sign and trade option for Brook Lopez. So like there are certain, and even the Lakers weren't mentioned, but that's a team that we know has been looking for center help. So like there's going to be some teams that are interested in Brook Lopez. And for the Bucks moving forward, again, I think that there could be a role for Brook if he did stay. It would not be the same role that Bucks fans have gotten accustomed to seeing him playing, I don't think, since he's been in Milwaukee, but there could be a role. It's just that I think that other teams might be able to offer a little bit more, not only financially, but playing time wise, if they go forward that way. And again, that puts Tyler Smith in that spotlight of like, what can you do in year 2?
Well, I think other teams would offer basically the same in terms of playing time and how they would use Brook. The big thing is just, and it's not even money because, you know, the Bucks obviously have his bird rights and they can pay to retain him. They can pay him whatever he wants to keep him here. But the realistic approach here is even if you have Giannis back and let's say you have a home run offseason where you keep all the guys that we've highlighted and you even add some more. And we've seen some things too, like, hey, they're working out Mark Sears in the pre-draft workouts, that maybe you use the 47 pick on him, who I believe Jonathan Givony had as one of the 3 best shooters in this draft. Let's say you have a home run offseason. You're still going to be picked at best to finish probably 5th in the Eastern Conference next season. So for Brook Lopez, it's more of a, where can I go where I can compete for a championship is I think going to be the big thing. You'll hear, as you mentioned, the Warriors. I mean, you could do a sign and trade where you get maybe a couple 2nd-round picks or something, and you just create a trade exception. The problem is the Warriors are in a pretty similar spot to the Bucks, that they don't have much in terms of assets to offer. I don't think the Warriors are going to say, let's do a sign and trade. We'll give you Moses Moody. You give us Brook Lopez. The Lakers are another team that's probably going to come up. They're in a similar spot to the Warriors, that they would have to shed some money to be able to give him the taxpayer mid-level if he takes that, or a biannual hard caps you at the first apron. So they'd have work to do there, but those are the types of teams I think you're going to hear. The interesting part too is for the free agent rankings, I usually go off of the Dunked On crew and how they have things laid out. I trust their opinion on all of it. They have Brook Lopez as the 3rd best center available on the market this year. And the top 3 are Miles Turner, who will turn 30 next season. That's fascinating. I think we're all assuming he's going to be back in Indiana, but what if the Pacers win the championship and Miles Turner says, you know what, got the title, I've been a lifelong Pacer, but now I'm going to get paid. So I'm going to go to whoever's willing to give me the most. Al Horford, number 2, he's 39 years old. Who knows what happens with him there in Boston? I would assume he goes back to Boston on a very, very team-friendly deal there. And then that brings us to Brook Lopez. So you're going to have teams that say, look, it's a very poor man's version of Miles Turner at this point because of the age, and even the shooting numbers dipped a little bit for Brook. You're going to have teams that say, we were in on Miles Turner, we didn't get him. How much do we think it's going to cost us to get Brook Lopez here? And that's probably going to be the natural pivot this offseason.
Yeah, and it goes back to what we discussed when we were talking about the Bobby Portis market, where I was like, if you look at who are free agents this summer, like Bobby is going to be considered one of the top power forwards if he opts out of that player option. And the same goes for Brook Lopez, just based on who else is available. And teams are going to be trying to add something, do something differently. So like when you only have so many options, and like you mentioned, Miles Turner is seen as the best center on the market this upcoming offseason. Al Horford's almost 40, and kind of hinted towards, I might be wrapping this up soon. And if he does come back, I agree with you. I think it probably would be to Boston. Yeah. So it leaves you Brook Lopez. So I can understand, like I'm seeing a comment, which someone mentioned that we could get an undrafted center and they would make more of an impact than Brook Lopez. Like the Brook disrespect is it's out of pocket. Like, come on now. Like we can't do that. But I can understand the frustration of watching Brook play last year and thinking of like, okay, we got to do something different. It's not working the way it has before in the past, but that does not mean he has no value. Like, that's the part for me where it's like, all right, I can understand that, but let's not get too crazy with the Brook disrespect. But for the Bucks, again, with how they pitch this to Giannis of like what they plan for this year, I think that going forward, Giannis should probably be the oldest Buck on the team generally. And if not, maybe only one or two other guys, like very minimum older guys on the roster next to Giannis. Like, this Bucks team just has to get younger. And I think that's the pathway forward, not only just for the play style, but again, we've mentioned how the CBA and whatnot is making teams reconfigure how they built their rosters.
And again, I would assume, with the fact that Dame is probably not playing next year, Giannis is going to be the oldest player on the team next year, assuming he is in fact still on the Bucks, because if you retain Bobby Portis is younger than Giannis. And then you go down the list, as we mentioned, Gary Trent Jr., 26 years old, Jericho Sims and those types that you have to retain as well. He's 26 years old. So you've been able to cobble together some young pieces all of a sudden. Ryan Rollins is 23, who you got to retain. Kevin Porter Jr. is 25, 26 as well. So you've all of a sudden started to get much younger here, and that's what the Bucks need to lean into here. Is Giannis is our vet. Giannis is our Dirk Nowitzki, and how the Mavs finally built that up and got to that second finals and won the title with Dirk. So I think that's the path here, and now it's just a matter of what can you do to supplement everything around you in the interim in terms of the young players and assets that you have. There was a very interesting conversation that we alluded to. Which team in the Eastern Conference has the brightest future, and are we all prisoners of the moment and falling victim to the same trap we do each and every year? We'll share our thoughts coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. So, Camille, before we do get into that conversation, just looking through some other free agency player rankings here. One thing that may not bode too well for the Bucks is Gary Trent Jr. is one of the 4 or 5 best 2-guard free agents this summer. So again, it depends on what other guys take. Quentin Grimes is a free agent. He's going to get paid before Gary Trent Jr. Cam Thomas, same story. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, if he doesn't stay in Minnesota, I think somebody's going to pay a lot of money for him. And then you get Malik Beasley, who I would assume has a bigger market than Gary Trent Jr. because of what he did shooting the ball. As we mentioned, Gary Trent Jr. is a better fit for the Bucks than Malik Beasley was because of his two-way capability. But it's going to get very interesting if these players stay where they are. If Nickeil Alexander-Walker stays in Minnesota, Quentin Grimes stays with the Sixers, and Cam Thomas, if Brooklyn retains him and thinks we're going star hunting, and Malik Beasley for that matter too. That's where it gets interesting. If all those players stay, and then all of a sudden Gary Trent Jr. is the hot commodity on the market. So that's something for the Bucks to keep an eye on. And Jericho Sims is the other one, because you've started to hear more and more of people talk about Jericho Sims' versatility, and looking at some of the rankings there, his name is up there with one other interesting name. So before we pivot to who has the brighter future, take your personal bias out of it. Take the Bucks glasses off. Who do you think has a bigger market, and who would you rather have? Jericho Sims or Luke Cornett?
I would assume that Luke Cornett would have the bigger market just because of the offense.
And because of that game, game 4 too.
Yeah. And then, I mean, he flashed a little bit of the defense there as well. So I think it would be Cornett because he just has a more developed offensive game than Jericho Sims does at this point. But I do think that Jericho Sims' skill set with the defense, if you can put him on the floor with a lineup that has enough shooting, enough spacing, like, you can use him in a way that could be really, really beneficial. So I think overall Luke Cornett, but I think Jericho Sims, again, it could be a really valuable piece.
I don't know who the team is, but to your point, if there's a team that loves their shooting, I know it's not Orlando, but if there's a team that loves their shooting and says, we got spacing. I mean, even the Lakers, when you talk about a lob threat to play alongside Luka and that defensive ability, that makes a lot of sense to me for Jericho Sims. So I do think he's going to have a market out there, as I still feel pretty confident the Bucks are going to retain him. But I think there's going to be a market for Jericho Sims out there because of what he was able to flash defensively. And the other thing about Luke Cornett, I mean, we forget he's 29 years old. I mean, he was a member of the Bucks years ago. So he's already up to 29 here. It's not like Luke Cornett is this young player that all of a sudden broke out this season with the Boston Celtics. Okay, so what I mentioned before, if you listen to the Bill Simmons podcast, you'll know every Sunday he and Ryan Russillo do NBA-specific shows, and their most recent show, the discussion was centered around what team would you rather be going forward for the next couple of years in both the Eastern Conference and the Western Conference. So without swaying you one way or another and sharing with you what they both aligned on, Camille, who would you say, if you could pick any team in the West for the next 5 years that you would want to be, who would you pick?
The Thunder coming to mind first, seeing what they're doing in the playoffs. If not the Thunder, I'd probably go like Spurs because the Wemby effect and what they have around them.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't want to be a contrarian and just say, well, actually, it has to be the Thunder, but I do think we get a little bit guilty of forgetting how things always go. I would put the Spurs very close there. And even the Rockets are very interesting because of the assets that they've started to attain now. And what if they trade for, hopefully not Giannis, but what if they trade for Kevin Durant or something like that, where they get some offense? So, yeah, I mean, I think you have to choose the Thunder. We got some more thoughts on that we'll get to in a second, but the East is very different. I don't know that there's a clear-cut team that you would look at and say, well, this is it. If we asked you this a year ago, everybody's saying Boston. Mm-hmm. I don't think anybody was going to say Boston now after knowing Jason Tatum's probably not playing next season, and they've reached the point where, yep, we had our little 2 to 3 year run. We probably got to start breaking this thing apart. The Knicks, look, if Karl Anthony Towns doesn't go supernova in that fourth quarter and they're down 3-0 to the Pacers, and you're all of a sudden questioning, did we make the right moves here and going all in on Towns and Bridges when we could have used some of those assets to go star hunting for a Kevin Durant or for a Giannis, for that matter? That conversation is taking place if it's 3-0. And not to mention what happens with a coach and Tom Thibodeau. Yeah. The Cavs are going to get brought up quite a bit. The Pacers maybe get brought up, not quite as much as they should, not maybe. So Eastern Conference teams, who would you choose there?
I feel like it. My first thought goes to the Pacers. If I feel weird not giving Boston any, like, even without Tatum, like they have some pieces there, but they're aging at this point, and it feels like they're going to be trying to get off of some of those contracts this summer as well. It feels like it's Indiana. Like the only other teams that come to mind with thinking like futures is like a younger team that has shown something, which would be like Detroit, because it's like you're building something there. Made it to the playoffs for the first time in a few years. Something's being built. You have Cade Cunningham there, so like there are some things coming where it's just like it could be Detroit, but I think right now, based on what we've been seeing, it has to be Indiana.
Yeah, I think that's the clear answer there, because I think they're the model for what we're looking at here. And this is what we've talked about with building out the Bucks roster. When you look at, is Tyrese Halliburton the best player? Probably. Maybe it's Pascal Siakam, but it's not a superstar. It's a deep team, and it's a team that does not have any clear glaring weakness of just attack this. And we can talk about the defense as we did a year ago. Defense is much better now than it was a season ago. So I think that's the new model in the league. Is it's not two superstars or your big three and then you hope you stay healthy. You got to be deep. You got to have playoff depth, and you have to have a good player, a star, maybe not a superstar, because Indiana doesn't have that, but just don't have any holes. And that's what stands out to me is that's how the Pacers are constructed. They're going to have some questions in some cap situations to really mull over, maybe this offseason, even where we talked about retaining Miles Turner. Maybe that means you have to move on from a guy like Benedict Mathurin, or you have to move on from TJ McConnell or Obi Toppin. But that's a much different conversation, especially when they've started to add pieces like Jarris Walker. Both of their backup centers were down this season, and maybe they found something now all of a sudden with Tony Bradley, but they've been able to supplement with those types and with Ben Shepherd so that you can say, okay, we can move on from this. It's not impacting our starters, and we still have depth that we're able to replenish with. That's the model for success for go forward. It's when you get into the spot where we talk about with the Bucks, with the Boston Celtics, if you got to break this up and you got to trade key pieces that were starters for you, or playing heavy minutes and making a lot of money, that's when you start to leverage yourself and get into trouble. And as I look through the East, Pacers are in that spot where they're not facing those things. I guess you could say the Magic are in that spot, but you look at all the teams that have had success of late, the Celtics, I don't think they're going to look the same next year. They're probably going to be right around where the Bucks are. Best case scenario for the Bucks. The Bucks. The Cavaliers are a team that came up quite a bit too, but we forget Cleveland. They've now failed to get out of the second round 3 years in a row with this same core. And there were questions during the regular season too about, is this just a regular season team? Is it Kenny Atkinson that's changed everything? You can talk about health, but I think as any Bucks fan would tell you, look, don't bring the injuries thing to me because we've seen it. And, you can't say, well, this isn't going to happen this year. It was only next year. It was only this year. And plus it was one game that Cleveland was dealing with all those guys out. So, it's an expensive team too, that's already into the second apron, that those questions aren't going to go away. That to me, to kind of pull all of this together just kind of reinforces why, if you're Giannis, you want to stay in the Eastern Conference. And as you look around at these teams and you say, okay, what's the Eastern Conference team? Cleveland was kicked around on that same podcast weeks ago. What if you trade Mobley for Giannis? Not to mention, it's not even possible under this CBA, but you get in these spots where all these teams you would look at in the East, okay, what's it going to cost to get Giannis? And what's that going to do to the depth that we have? That slowly but surely, if you're Giannis, I think you reach the point to say, maybe, but if we keep all these pieces, we build these things, maybe it is 2 years from now that we're right back in that conversation of, wow, the Bucks have pivoted to one of the top 3 teams, 4 teams in the Eastern Conference. That I think the more we see here, the more it's just apparent. You got to stay in the East. If you stay in the East, I don't see that clear pathway, what team it is that makes the most sense, that you might as well stay with the team you're on now. And, it's what those 2 teams that we mentioned in the West, that is what we said weeks ago. And I just keep coming back to, if the Spurs are actually saying, no, we're good, then it's basically, what can Houston offer you? Otherwise, I'm just going to stay here and I'm going to put faith in this group of guys that we're going to continue to build this way and play around these guys. And we've seen a wide open Eastern Conference. And from the looks of the next few years, that's not going to change anytime soon.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I see some comments coming through as well with the mention of with the Pacers, of like, it's a lot of guys who know their role and how continuity played a part in that for them, where it's like, you know exactly what you're here to do. And if the Bucks could start building towards that again with younger players who are coming up in this system with an understanding, and even when we look at the Pacers like payroll, like outside of Miles Turner, they're locked in for next year with most of the people who you've been seeing on the court hooping for them. So for the Bucks, again, I agree with you wholeheartedly on the East is where you would probably want to be, just because when you look around, that's the easiest pathway to get back to the finals. But also, if you can start building that, again, if this is a quote unquote gap year or whatever you want to call it, of we're building to a new system. And in this new system, we know Gary Trent Jr. works. We know Kevin Porter Jr. works. We know AJ Green works, so on and so forth. And then we continue to add on to that. You hope to get some more development from a Tyler Smith, from, I saw a comment earlier bringing up Chris Livingston in the conversation here. But the point remains of just finding those guys, continue to build, and then next year see what that free agent market looks like and continue to go from there.
I mean, look, it's not going to be easy. We're not suggesting that. And I can't stress this enough too. Even if you have that type of offseason where all those names that we went through, you keep Jericho Sims, you keep Kevin Porter Jr., you keep Ryan Rollins, you keep Gary Trent Jr., Bobby Portis, maybe he does something where he opts out and extends for lesser money. That would be great. You're still probably going to be picked to finish 5th or 6th in the Eastern Conference. But if you give yourself that stability and say, okay, this is the next iteration of the Bucks, and we're going to continue to develop guys like AJ Green, who you're going to have to extend, the importance of developing guys like Andre Jackson Jr. and certainly Tyler Smith as well. And what can you do with that 47th pick? Can you turn something else into future assets? You have things too, like we mentioned, the non-taxpayer mid-level that you can use. Maybe you have to break that out, or you will probably have to break that up to use to keep Gary Trent Jr. and Kevin Porter Jr., but you're going to be hard capped at the first apron, so you might as well use the biannual as well, and you can use that on a rotational piece. You have the trade exception that you get into the season and you say, okay, we can trade for this player into our trade exception here. So there are some things you can do to start to crawl out of this hole. It is not going to be championship or bust expectations, even if you have Giannis next season, but you can start to find some things here and all of a sudden start to enter that conversation of a wide open Eastern Conference, especially as this figures to be, I mean, to say interesting is putting it mildly, but I think we're all fascinated to see, what do the Celtics do? What do the Cavs do? Like, do you just say, run it back again next season? We think this year will be different because, as we just said, Camille, I think most Bucks fans will tell you, boy, that's a dangerous trap to fall into.
Yeah, it definitely can be a dangerous trap, but also I can see like Cleveland. I know we're running long, so we can wrap here soon, but looking at Donovan Mitchell, like after that series of being like, I know we're going to get talked about a lot over the offseason, and we honestly deserve that. But we plan to come back and we plan to be better than last year. And we've seen Bucks teams have great regular seasons, and then come playoff time, it doesn't necessarily work out the way that you thought that it would. So like Cleveland is a team that you have to have a healthy level of respect for going forward, just because of what they were able to do during the regular season. But again, I feel like it's more wide open in the East than it is in the West. And that piece mixed in with the fact of what you can continue to build here in Milwaukee. And we know Giannis does want to stay. He just has to see the path forward to championship contention. So if they can sell him on that and he agrees with it, it's time to go forward.
In closing, I would just say this to Camille. Jericho Sims was not undrafted. He was a 2nd-round pick. So if we're going to say no, the NBA landscape, I would say practice what you preach there. We're hoping to get Frank on the show here, ideally tomorrow, to share some of his thoughts on all of this that we talked about, the offseason, what to expect in terms of the landscape of free agency. So we'll get Frank's thoughts here in the coming days, and just remain on standby to see what's the latest to come from Mark Stein, Jake Fisher, and others on Doc Rivers, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and the Eastern Conference as a whole. That'll do it for today's show. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk with you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.